It was exactly 9:02 p.m. on a Tuesday, October 14th, 2025, to be incredibly specific. I was standing in my own kitchen, in my own house, washing my own dishes. The house was a beautiful mid-century modern build nestled right against the glowing, rust-colored red rocks of Sedona, Arizona. I had bought the place exactly 6 months prior, trading the chaotic concrete jungle for some quiet desert serenity. Or so I thought. My hands were deep in Dawn dish soap bubbles, scrubbing a stubbornly crusty lasagna pan. I looked up. I looked out my massive custom street-facing kitchen window. I wanted to enjoy the moonlight washing over the desert landscape. Instead, I saw a flashlight beam violently cutting through the dark. Flash. Flash. Sweep. It was coming from the edge of my driveway. I dropped the sponge. I dried my hands on a towel. I squinted into the darkness. Standing there, barely illuminated by the pale moonlight, was a man in khaki cargo shorts and a tactical vest. A tactical vest. In a gated community where the biggest threat is a stray jackrabbit. He was holding a clipboard. A neon green clipboard that practically glowed in the dark. He was writing furiously. It was Richard. Now, let me tell you about Richard. Richard was the president of the Red Rock Vista Homeowners Association. He was a retired middle management executive who clearly missed having subordinates to terrorize. His entire personality was wrapped up in enforcing rules that no one else cared about. Things Richard genuinely believed were threats to civil society. Grass over 2 inches tall, trash cans left out past 7 a.m., and apparently me looking out my own window. I opened my front door. The cool desert air hit my face. I stepped out onto the porch. "Richard?" I called out into the night. "Are you literally scoping out my kitchen window right now?" Richard didn't even flinch. He clicked his pen. A heavy, metallic click. He marched right up to my porch, entirely unapologetic. "Good evening, neighbor," he said. His voice was completely devoid of any actual neighborly warmth. It sounded like a dial-up modem trying to connect. "Is it a good evening, Richard? Because you're standing in my driveway with a flashlight like a confused burglar." "The CC&Rs clearly state Section 4, Paragraph B," Richard droned, not missing a beat, reading directly from his glowing clipboard. "All street-facing windows must be covered by neutral-colored blinds from dusk till dawn. You are in direct violation. I observed a clear line of sight into your kitchen at precisely 2100 hours. I stared at him. I literally just stared at him for a solid 10 seconds. "Richard, I was washing dishes. I like the moonlight. My blinds are pulled up so I can see the ski. Are you telling me I'm not allowed to look outside my own house after sunset?" "I don't write the rules, I just enforce them," Richard said. The ultimate battle cry of the petty tyrant. "The rule is designed to maintain a uniform aesthetic for the neighborhood during evening hours. Open blinds create visual clutter. Consider this your official citation." He ripped the neon green slip off his clipboard and handed it to me. I took it. It felt heavy. It felt like an insult. I looked at the bottom line. Fine assessed, $250. $250? I practically shouted. "For an open curtain? Are you out of your mind?" "Payment is due within 30 days. Have a pleasant evening." Richard turned on his heel. He actually did a military-style about-face. He marched down my driveway, his flashlight beam swinging wildly, off to terrorize someone whose porch light was the wrong wattage. I went back inside. I was furious. I was absolutely boiling. Visual clutter? I lived alone. I was washing a pan. I paced around my kitchen for an hour. I looked at my window. The blinds were those cheap, beige plastic slatted things the previous owner had left behind. They were ugly. They gathered dust like it was their full-time job. And now, they were costing me money. The sheer audacity of this man patrolling the neighborhood to check if people were hiding inside their own homes properly. I couldn't let this go. I wouldn't. Wednesday, October 15th, 2025. The very next day, I woke up with a plan. A petty, stupid plan, but a plan nonetheless. If Richard wanted me to strictly manage my blinds, I was going to manage them right out of existence. I spent the entire morning unscrewing the brackets. I pulled the beige plastic monstrosities down. I hauled them out to the garage and threw them unceremoniously into the corner. My windows were completely bare. Gloriously bare. Sunlight poured into my living room and kitchen. It felt amazing. It felt like freedom. That night, I sat in my living room watching TV. The windows were wide open to the dark street. I knew he would come. I just knew it. At exactly 9:15 p.m., the flashlight beam sliced through the darkness. Flash. Flash. Heavy footsteps on the driveway. I didn't even go outside this time. I just walked right up to the bare glass and stood there, drinking a glass of water, staring directly out at him. Richard froze. He pointed the flashlight directly at my face. I waved. He clicked his pen. He scribbled furiously. He didn't come to the door. He just marched to my mailbox, shoved a piece of paper inside, and practically jogged away. Thursday morning, October 16th. I walked to the mailbox. Another neon green slip. Fine assessed, $250. Total balance, $500. Reason: complete removal of required window coverings. He had added a handwritten note at the bottom. Do not test me. Do not test me? Oh, Richard, you have no idea who you are dealing with. I don't just test the limits. I rewrite the entire syllabus. I took the citation back inside and sat down at my kitchen island. I opened my laptop. It was time to stop playing defense. I wasn't going to just take the blinds down and eat a $250 fine every single day until I went bankrupt. That wasn't a victory. That was just being stubborn. I needed a victory. I needed to maliciously comply so hard that the HOA board would legally choke on their own rulebook. I needed a loophole. I started searching. I pulled up the Red Rock Vista HOA Declaration of Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions. I read through Section 4, Paragraph B again. All street-facing windows must be covered by neutral-colored blinds from dusk till dawn. It was a remarkably poorly written rule. It didn't specify the material. It didn't specify the thickness. But it was still a rule. If I put up curtains, I lost. If I left them bare, I lost. So, I expanded my search. I left the petty neighborhood bylaws and went straight to the top. I pulled up the Arizona Revised Statutes. State law. The big leagues. State law always supersedes HOA bylaws. If I could find a state law that protected my right to do something weird to my windows, Richard couldn't touch me. I spent 4 hours reading property law. My eyes were bleeding. I was drinking coffee so dark it looked like motor oil. And then, right around 2 p.m., I found it. It was like a beacon of shining bureaucratic light, a RS Section 33-1816. I read it once. I read it twice. A slow, sinister smile crept across my face. The statute was explicitly titled, Solar energy devices, reasonable restrictions, fees and costs. Here is what the great state of Arizona mandates. An HOA cannot legally prohibit the installation or use of any qualifying solar energy device. And what does the state define as a qualifying solar energy device? It includes, very specifically, energy-efficient solar window tinting and films designed to reduce heat gain. If I applied a solar blocking film to my windows, the HOA could not legally force me to take it down. The state government explicitly protected my right to reduce my air conditioning bill. But how did that help me with Richard's neutral-colored covering rule? I did a little more digging. Window film comes in hundreds of styles. You can get mirrored, you can get blackout, but you can also get a very specific type of film known as white frosted UV blocking solar film. From the outside, during the day, it looks exactly like a flat, neutral-colored white window blind. It completely obscures the view inside. It perfectly satisfies Section 4, Paragraph B of the CC&Rs. But from the inside? A white frosted film pulled tight across a glass pane isn't just an energy-saving device. It is a high-definition rear projection screen. My heart was literally pounding in my chest. This wasn't just a loophole. This was a tactical nuke wrapped in a legal technicality. I could put up the film. I would be legally protected by the state of Arizona from having to remove it. I would be mathematically complying with the HOA's rule for a neutral-colored covering. And I would have a blank 100-inch canvas facing directly out into Richard's precious, highly regulated neighborhood. I didn't waste a single second. I pulled out my phone and searched for commercial AV and window tinting contractors in the Sedona area. I needed a professional. I needed this done fast, and I needed it done perfectly. I found a guy named Mike who owned a local shop called Desert Shield Window Solutions. I called the number. Desert Shield, this is Mike. Mike, hey, I have a slightly unusual residential project, and I need it done as soon as humanly possible. Unusual how? Mike asked. He sounded skeptical. Probably thought I wanted him to tint my shower doors or something. I need you to come to my house and apply maximum-grade commercial white frosted solar tint to my massive front living room window. I mean the really heavy-duty stuff. The stuff that blocks UV rays but is completely opaque white. Sure, I can do that, Mike said. Saves a ton on the AC bill during the summer. We use a high-end static cling vinyl. It's solid. Great, I said. Now for the unusual part. Can you also mount a 4K laser projector to my ceiling and map the projection perfectly onto that frosted window? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. A projector? Pointing at the window film? Exactly. Like, for movie nights? Mike asked, genuine confusion creeping into his voice. If you project onto frosted film from the inside, anyone standing on the street is going to see the image perfectly. It acts like a rear projection screen. You won't be able to see it well from the couch. Mike, I said, leaning back in my chair and staring at the $500 worth of neon green citations sitting on my counter. I don't want to watch the movie. I want the street to watch the movie. Another pause. Then a low, rumbling chuckle came through the phone. HOA trouble? You have no idea. I'll be there tomorrow at 9 a.m. Mike pulled up to my house the next morning at exactly 8:55 a.m. in a heavily decaled Ford Transit van. Honestly, The guy was a legend from the second he stepped out of the driver's seat. He was wearing cargo pants covered in adhesive stains and a faded t-shirt that just said, "I can fix it," in block letters. He grabbed a massive toolbox and a long cardboard tube from the back and walked up my driveway, already staring at the giant, bare living room window. "So this is ground zero, huh?" Mike asked, setting his gear down on my porch. "This is it," I said, shaking his hand. "This is where we strike a blow for freedom, or at least for the right to not be fined for doing my own dishes." We walked inside, and I showed him the space. The living room had this vaulted ceiling with exposed wooden beams, which was perfect for mounting hardware. Mike started measuring the glass. It was a single, uninterrupted pane, roughly 110 inches diagonally. It was basically an IMAX screen waiting to happen. "I mean, I brought the heavy-duty stuff," Mike said, unrolling a sheet of thick, opaque white vinyl from the cardboard tube. "This is industrial-grade solar film. It rejects 99% of UV rays and significantly drops the heat index of the room. It's technically an energy efficiency upgrade. From the outside, it's going to look exactly like a solid white roller shade pulled tight. Totally flat. Totally boring." "Boring is exactly what we need," I said. "Boring is HOA compliant. What about the projector?" Mike grinned. He popped open his toolbox and pulled out a sleek, black, rectangular piece of hardware. "Epson Pro Cinema 4K laser projector. Short throw lens. Pushes out about 4,000 lumens. Literally, this thing is a miniature sun. I use these for outdoor amphitheaters and high-end sports bars. If you point this at that frosted film in a dark room, the image is going to punch right through the glass and be crystal clear to anyone standing in the street. It's going to be aggressively bright." "Mike, you are an artist," I said. We got to work. Or rather, Mike got to work, while I handed him tools and drank coffee. He sprayed the window down with some kind of soapy slip solution, carefully applied the white film, and used a heavy rubber squeegee to push all the air bubbles out to the edges. It took about an hour. When he was done, we walked outside to the street to check it out. It was perfect. It just looked like I had installed a very expensive, perfectly fitted, matte white privacy shade. There was absolutely no visual clutter. It was the most neutral-colored window covering in the history of Sedona, Arizona. Richard couldn't fine me for this. It was physically impossible to look at this window and be offended unless you just really, really hated the color white. Next came the hardware. Mike drilled into the ceiling beam, mounted a heavy-duty bracket, and secured the 4K projector. He ran the power and HDMI cables along the edge of the beam so they were completely hidden, dropping the HDMI down to a small media console in the corner where my laptop was sitting. "All right, let's test the alignment," Mike said, jumping down from his ladder. "Pull up a test grid." I hooked up my laptop, navigated to my settings, and pushed a 4K test pattern to the projector. The machine hummed to life. A blindingly bright beam of light shot across the living room and hit the frosted window. Mike and I ran outside. I literally gasped. The test grid, a series of bright red, blue, and green squares, was glowing on my front window with the intensity of a Times Square billboard. The colors were incredibly saturated. The lines were razor sharp. Because the film was designed to catch and diffuse light, it acted as a perfect rear projection screen. "Honestly," Mike said, shaking his head and laughing quietly, "you are going to start a neighborhood war. The cops are going to be called. I just want you to know that." "I am counting on it," I said. I paid Mike his invoice, tipped him an extra $100 for his discretion, and spent the rest of the afternoon waiting for the sun to go down. I guess I should explain why I chose a hippopotamus. I could have projected anything, right? I could have put up a roaring fireplace. I could have put up a nice, relaxing aquarium. But I didn't want relaxing. I wanted something so profoundly stupid, so utterly devoid of logic or context, that it would completely short-circuit Richard's bureaucratic brain. I searched YouTube for about an hour before I found the Holy Grail. A video titled 10 Hours of Hippo Yawning, 4K UHD. It was exactly what it sounded like. A massive, sweaty river hippopotamus staring directly into the camera, slowly opening its jaws to a near 180-degree angle, showing off its gigantic tusks and fleshy pink tonsils, closing its mouth, and then repeating the process. Over and over. For 10 hours. At 8:30 p.m., the Sedona sky turned a deep, bruised purple. The streetlights flickered on. The neighborhood got very, very quiet. I turned off all the lights in my living room. I booted up my laptop. I maximized the Hippo video, made sure it was set to loop seamlessly, and pressed play. The living room instantly bathed in a pulsating, fleshy pink light. I walked out my front door, stepped off the porch, and walked down the driveway to the street to get the full effect. I mean, words barely do it justice. It was glorious. My front window was now an 8-foot-tall, high-definition portal to the throat of a fatigued aquatic mammal. Because the projector was 4,000 lumens, the image didn't just sit on the glass. It practically radiated down the street. The pink glow of the hippo's mouth illuminated my driveway, my mailbox, and the decorative rocks in my front yard. Every 12 seconds, the hippo would slowly stretch its jaws open, revealing an abyss of teeth and tongue, and then slowly snap shut. It was mesmerizing. It was horrifying. It was technically an interior light, reflecting off an energy-efficient window tint. I dragged a lawn chair out onto my front porch, cracked open a can of sparkling water, and waited. It didn't take long for the audience to arrive. Brenda from 3 houses down was out walking her golden retriever. She was an older lady, usually very quiet, kept to herself. She came strolling down the sidewalk, humming some tune, when her dog suddenly stopped dead in its tracks. The dog let out a low, confused growl. Brenda looked up. She dropped the leash. I am not exaggerating. The woman literally dropped the leash. She stood on the sidewalk, bathed in the pink light of the yawning hippo, her mouth hanging open in a mirror image of the animal on my window. "Hey, Brenda!" I called out from the dark porch. She jumped, startled. "Oh, good Lord! Is that a hippopotamus?" "Sure is," I said cheerfully. "Just enjoying some nature documentaries. Keeps the living room lively." "It's very large," Brenda managed to say. She quickly gathered her dog's leash and hurried down the street, casting nervous glances back over her shoulder. By 9 p.m., a small crowd had gathered. And by a small crowd, I mean like 3 teenagers on bicycles and a guy named Dave. From the next street over, who had driven past, slammed on his brakes, and reversed just to stare at it. Everyone was pointing. A few people were taking pictures with their phones. It was a neighborhood landmark in under 30 minutes. And then, at exactly 9:15 p.m., the crowd parted. Marching down the center of the asphalt, practically stomping a crater into the street with every step, was Richard. He was wearing his tactical vest. He was clutching his neon green clipboard to his chest like a shield. His face, illuminated by the undulating pink light of the hippo's tonsils, was contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He didn't even bother coming up the driveway. He stood at the curb, planted his feet shoulder-width apart, and pointed a shaking finger at my house. "Turn that off!" he screamed. His voice echoed off the red rocks. "Turn that unapproved exterior light display off immediately!" I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, stood up from my lawn chair, and casually strolled down the driveway to meet him. "Evening, Richard. Lovely night for a stroll, isn't it?" "Do not play games with me," he barked, clicking his pen with such force I thought the spring was going to launch into orbit. "This is a direct, egregious violation of the community standards. Unapproved exterior light displays, unapproved projected art, creating a public nuisance, and creating a traffic hazard." "Richard, I honestly think you need to get your eyes checked," I said, leaning against my mailbox. "There is no exterior light display. There is no projected art on the outside of my house." "I am looking right at it," he yelled, gesturing wildly at the massive, fleshy pink mouth currently dominating the neighborhood. "No, you are looking at my interior living room wall," I corrected him calmly. "I am watching a documentary on my television. Well, technically, I'm watching it on a projector inside my home. Are you telling me the HOA regulates what television programs I am allowed to watch inside my own house?" Richard sputtered. He actually spit a little bit. "It is projecting onto the glass. You are using the window as a screen. That makes it an exterior display." "Actually, Richard, it makes it an interior display that you just happen to be looking at from the outside," I said, pulling a folded piece of paper from my back pocket. "Because, as you'll notice during the day, my window is covered by a flat, neutral-colored white film. It perfectly satisfies Section 4, Paragraph B of your little rulebook." "I don't care about the film," Richard shouted. "I care about the giant glowing animal." "Well, you should care about the film," I said, unfolding the paper and handing it to him. "Because that film is a commercial-grade, UV-blocking solar tint. It is an energy-saving device. And according to the Arizona Revised Statutes, Section 33-1816, which you are holding right there, this HOA is legally prohibited from restricting my use of a solar energy device. The state protects my window film. The state protects my right to be energy efficient." Richard snatched the paper. He shined his tactical flashlight onto it. I watched his eyes scan the legal jargon. I watched the realization slowly, painfully click into place. "If you try to fine me for my window film," I continued, dropping my voice to a very quiet, very serious tone, "I will immediately file a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate for violating state solar energy laws. Do you know what the state does to HOAs that violate state law, Richard? They audit them. They audit everything." Richard looked from the paper to me, and then up at the window. The hippo yawned again, a massive, silent, glowing pink roar. "It's a nuisance," Richard hissed, his voice trembling. "It's a disturbance of the peace. I am calling the police." "Go right ahead," I smiled. "I'll wait." He actually did it. I mean, the guy literally pulled his smartphone out of one of the 80 pockets on his tactical vest, right there on the curb, and dialed the police. He didn't even call the non-emergency line, which, honestly, is probably a misdemeanor in itself. He dialed 911. I just stood there on my driveway, sipping my sparkling water. The hippo yawned. Richard glared at me. I smiled back. We stood in complete, agonizing silence for roughly 18 minutes. The only light on the street was the rhythmic, pulsating pink glow of a massive, wet mammalian mouth opening and closing on a loop. It was, without a doubt, the most surreal standoff in the history of local government. Eventually, a Sedona Police Department SUV rolled slowly around the corner. The headlights swept across my lawn, and then the driver abruptly hit the brakes. You could literally see the front end of the cruiser dip. The officer didn't turn on his sirens, but he did flick on his red and blue light bar, which immediately began clashing horribly with the pink Hippo glow. It looked like a very confusing, incredibly cheap rave. 2 officers stepped out of the vehicle. They were both tall, wearing standard-issue dark uniforms, and they both instantly stopped in their tracks. They didn't look at Richard. They didn't look at me. They just stared straight up at my living room window. "Officers, over here!" Richard yelled, waving his neon clipboard like he was trying to flag down a rescue helicopter. "I am the one who called. I am the HOA president." The first officer, a guy who looked like he was maybe pushing 30 and desperately needed a coffee, slowly pulled his gaze away from the giant, glowing tonsils and walked over to us. His partner trailed closely behind, one hand resting casually on his utility belt, still stealing glances at the window. "Evening, folks," the first officer said. "We received a call about a severe public nuisance and a potential traffic hazard." He trailed off, looking back up at the house. "Sir, is that a hippopotamus?" "It is," I said, taking another sip of my water. "High definition, 4K. It's an unauthorized, disruptive exterior light display," Richard practically shrieked, stepping right into the officer's personal space. "He is projecting an offensive, flashing image onto the street to intentionally harass the neighborhood. It's a violation of the peace." The second officer finally spoke up. He looked at me, completely deadpan. "Is it making any noise?" "Nope," I said. "Mute. Totally silent. I guess I could hook up some Bluetooth speakers if you guys want the full immersive aquatic experience, but right now, it's quiet as a mouse." "Do not encourage him," Richard snapped. "Okay, let's just take a breath," the first officer said, holding up a hand to stop Richard's impending aneurysm. He turned to me. "Sir, walk me through this. The projector, where is the actual machine?" "It's bolted to the ceiling beam inside my living room," I explained smoothly, "and the window is coated with an energy-efficient, UV-blocking solar film. It's perfectly legal, state-approved weatherization. I'm just watching a documentary inside my own house. The fact that the film catches the light and displays it to the street is just a fun little side effect of the physics of rear projection." The second officer let out a sharp, poorly concealed snort of laughter. He quickly turned his head and pretended to cough into his fist. "He's exploiting a loophole," Richard yelled, pointing an accusatory finger at my face. "He is deliberately circumventing the bylaws." The first officer sighed. It was a very deep, very tired sigh. He looked at Richard. "Sir, Richard, is it? Look, my partner and I respond to noise complaints, domestic disputes, burglaries, and traffic accidents. What you have here is a guy watching a silent nature video inside his own private residence." "But you can see it from the street," Richard argued, his voice cracking. "It's blinding." "It's bright, sure," the officer conceded. "But it's not a strobe light. It's not flashing red and blue. It's not a laser pointed at an aircraft. It's an interior light. We don't regulate interior decorating. If he wants to paint his living room neon green, we can't stop him. If he wants to project a hippo onto his window, we can't stop him. This is entirely a civil matter between you and him." "It's a traffic hazard," Richard tried again, grasping at literal straws. The officer looked up and down the completely empty, dead silent suburban street. "There is no traffic, Richard. And even if there was, distracting a driver with a cool hippo isn't in the penal code." I honestly thought Richard was going to spontaneously combust right there on my driveway. His face went from bright red to a dangerous shade of purple. He opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. He just let out this weird, high-pitched squeak of pure frustration. "Have a good night, gentlemen," the first officer said, tipping his hat slightly. "And maybe, I don't know, put on a rhino next time. Mix, sit up." "I was thinking a sea turtle," I replied, completely deadpan. "Nice," the second officer grinned. They got back into their cruiser, turned off the flashing lights, and slowly drove away. Richard didn't say another word to me. He couldn't. He just turned around, his shoulders completely slumped, and walked back up the street, a defeated man bathed in the undulating pink light of my magnificent, yawning beast. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but honestly, cornered HOA boards are like cornered wild animals. They don't retreat. They just get weirder and more aggressive. The police shutting Richard down didn't solve the problem. It just moved the battlefield from my driveway to my mailbox. Over the next 5 days, I received 3 separate certified letters from the Red Rock Vista Homeowners Association. I mean, they were literally spending the community's dues on priority postage just to yell at me on expensive paper. The first letter arrived on Monday. It completely ignored the state law I had showed Richard. Instead, it tried to pivot. They claimed my window was no longer a window, but a temporary digital billboard, which fell under a completely different, highly restrictive clause in the CC&Rs regarding commercial advertising. I laughed so hard I almost spilled my coffee. I wasn't selling anything. Unless they thought I was running an underground Hippo trafficking ring out of my garage, the clause was entirely irrelevant. The second letter came on Wednesday. This one was signed by the entire board, not just Richard. It was a formal notice of escalation. They stated that my unapproved exterior art installation was actively lowering neighborhood property values. They demanded immediate removal of the projection equipment and threatened to place a lien on my house for unpaid fines, which had now miraculously ballooned from $500 to $1,500 due to daily non-compliance fees. The third letter, which showed up on Friday, was the golden ticket. It was a formal summons. I was ordered to appear before a special closed-door disciplinary hearing of the HOA Board of Directors the following Tuesday evening at the community clubhouse. If I failed to appear, they would rule in my absence, finalize the $1,500 fine, and initiate legal proceedings to foreclose on my home over the unpaid balance. They thought they were intimidating me. They thought bringing me into their little carpeted clubhouse, sitting behind a folding table and glaring at me would make me crack. They completely misunderstood the situation. I wasn't trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare with them. They were trapped in a legal nightmare with me. I spent that entire weekend preparing. I didn't just print out the Arizona Revised Statutes. I went to a local office supply store and bought a thick, heavy-duty black 3-ring binder. I put ARS Section 33-1816 in the very front, slipped neatly into a plastic sheet protector. I printed out the state's definitions of solar energy devices. I printed out the specific product specifications of the commercial frosted tint Mike had installed, highlighting the exact UV rejection percentages and energy efficiency ratings. I also printed out a form I found on the Arizona Department of Real Estate's website. Formal complaint against a planned community /HOA for violation of state law. I filled it out completely, leaving only the date and my signature blank. Every single night, right at dusk, I fired up the projector. The neighborhood had honestly gotten used to it. The teenagers stopped pointing. Brenda actually waved at the Hippo when she walked her dog. It had become part of the local scenery. But I knew that a few streets over, Richard was sitting in his house, fuming, plotting his revenge for the upcoming hearing. Tuesday evening finally rolled around. The air was crisp, the sun was setting behind the red rocks, and it was time to end this. I didn't dress up. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of thinking I respected their faux authority. I threw on a comfortable gray hoodie, my favorite pair of worn-in jeans, and grabbed my massive black binder. The community clubhouse was a small, aggressively beige building near the neighborhood pool. I walked through the double glass doors at exactly 6:55 p.m. for my 7 p.m. hearing. The room was set up like a cheap courtroom. 5 folding tables were pushed together at the front of the room. Sitting behind them were the 5 members of the HOA board. Richards sat dead center, looking like a judge who had just been handed a very sour lemon. To his right was an older woman named Susan, who was known for measuring the distance between mailboxes and the curb. To his left was a guy in a suit, who I recognized from neighborhood emails as the board's retained legal counsel. That was a nice touch. They brought their lawyer. There was a single, lonely folding chair placed directly in the center of the room, facing the tables. The hot seat. "You're late," Richard snapped as I walked in, tapping his watch. "It's 6:58, Richard. I'm actually 2 minutes early," I said, ignoring the lone chair entirely. Instead, I walked right up to their table and dropped my heavy black binder onto the fake wood surface with a loud, echoing thud. Susan jumped. The lawyer blinked. Richard narrowed his eyes. "Let's just get this over with," I said, leaning my hands on the table and looking directly at their lawyer. "I assume you are the legal representation for this board?" The suit cleared his throat. "I am. My name is—" "I don't actually care what your name is," I interrupted, opening the binder to the first page. "I care about whether or not you've actually read the state laws governing the community you represent, or if you just blindly rubber stamp whatever Richard here gets upset about." "Excuse me," Richard barked, slamming his hand on the table. "You will show respect. This is a formal disciplinary hearing regarding your egregious violation of Section 4, Paragraph B. Section 4, Paragraph B requires a neutral-colored window covering." I cut him off again, speaking loud enough to bounce off the cheap acoustic ceiling tiles. During the day, my window is covered by a perfectly flat, perfectly neutral, solid white, solar film. It is completely compliant. You have zero grounds to fine me for my daytime aesthetics. "We are fining you for the nighttime display," Susan chimed in, her voice shrill. The animal." "The animal," I said slowly, turning my attention to her, "is a digital image being projected onto the inside of my window from inside my house. It is an interior light. Your CC&Rs do not and legally cannot govern the interior lighting choices of my private property. I confirmed this with the Sedona Police Department, who your president foolishly called to my house." I flipped the page in my binder, revealing the spec sheet for the window tint. I slid it across the table until it bumped into the lawyer's hands. "The only reason the image is visible from the street is because of the specific light-diffusing properties of my window covering," I explained, my voice dropping to a calm, terrifyingly flat tone. "Which brings us to the actual issue. That covering is a commercial-grade, UV-blocking solar film. It is classified by the state of Arizona as an energy-saving device." I flipped to the next page and slid the plastic-protected copy of the statute directly in front of Richard. Arizona Revised Statutes, Section 33-1816. A homeowners association shall not prohibit the installation or use of a solar energy device. Period. Full stop. You cannot force me to remove the film, and you cannot dictate how I light the interior of my home behind that film. Richard stared at the paper. His jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth were going to shatter. "It's a loophole," he whispered furiously. You're abusing the system." "I am maliciously complying with a poorly written rule book managed by a man with far too much time on his hands," I corrected him cheerfully. "But here is the fun part." I flipped to the very last page in the binder. I pulled out the formal complaint form for the Arizona Department of Real Estate. It was fully filled out. I slid it right to the center of the table. "This is a formal grievance reporting this HOA board for willful and documented harassment over a legally protected solar energy device. I have a paper trail of 3 certified letters from you, demanding I remove it. If I submit this to the state tomorrow morning, they will open a formal investigation. The fines for an HOA violating state energy laws are steep. I'm talking thousands of dollars, not to mention the legal fees you'll pay this guy." I pointed a thumb at the lawyer. "To defend you." The room went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the terrible clubhouse air conditioning. The lawyer picked up the complaint form. He read it carefully. He looked at the statute. He looked at the window film spec sheet. Then, he leaned over and whispered something into Richard's ear. I couldn't hear what he said, but I didn't need to. I watched Richard's face drain of all color. I watched his shoulders completely collapse. The tactical, aggressive aura he carried around the neighborhood completely vanished, replaced by the crushing reality of absolute bureaucratic defeat. Richard looked up at me. He looked like he had aged 10 years, in 3 minutes. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "I want the $1,500 in fines instantly dismissed and removed from my ledger," I said, ticking the items off on my fingers. "I want a formal written apology from the board for harassing me. And I want you to leave me, my window, and my Hippo entirely alone. Oh, and you're never allowed to walk onto my driveway with a flashlight again." Richard looked at the lawyer. The lawyer gave a very slight, very definitive nod. "Fine," Richard choked out. It sounded like the word physically hurt his throat. "The fines are dismissed. We will mail you a letter confirming the resolution." "I appreciate it, Richard," I smiled, closing my binder. "Honestly, this has been great. Really productive. Have a fantastic evening." I turned around and walked out of the clubhouse. The cool desert air felt incredible. I didn't even look back. I just walked home, completely victorious. That night, I decided to switch things up. The Hippo had done its job. It had fought the good fight, and it had won. It was time for a change of pace. I booted up the laptop, opened a new file, and pushed it to the projector. When I walked out to my street to check the view, the entire front of my house was bathed in a gentle, rolling, deep, oceanic blue. A massive, incredibly high-definition sea turtle was lazily swimming across my living room window, surrounded by vibrant coral reefs. It was peaceful. It was beautiful. It was 100% legal. And as I stood there on my driveway, watching the turtle glide past, I couldn't help but laugh. Because at the end of the day, when you're dealing with neighborhood dictators, you don't fight them with logic. You fight them with the law, a short-throw projector, and a heavy dose of sovereign authority.